Sheriff Walter Briggs had always been a symbol of strength in the quiet mountain town of Deerfield, a man of few words but great respect. He had served for nearly 3 decades without ever calling for backup. Everyone said nothing could shake him until the crash. It happened on a winding forest road just past midnight. Rain was hammering down, thunder cracking through the hills. Sheriff Briggs had been driving home after helping locate a missing hiker. He was exhausted, the road slick. A flash of headlights came from nowhere, swerving straight into his lane. The collision was brutal. Metal crunched. Glass exploded. The sheriff's SUV flipped twice before landing in a ditch, smoke hissing from under the hood. Inside, Briggs was pinned, legs crushed, ribs broken, bleeding badly. His radio had flown out of reach. His flashlight was gone, and his voice barely a whisper. Time blurred. The rain kept falling. The forest was silent, save for the ticking of the dying engine. Walter knew no one would find him in time. His vision dimmed. His breaths came shallow. And just as his eyes began to close, he saw it. Out of the dark trees emerged a silhouette, low, strong, and silent. A German shepherd, soaked in rain, eyes locked on him. It stepped closer, then barked, sharp, loud, desperate. Sheriff Briggs didn't know where it came from or how it found him, but in that moment, he wasn't alone. The German shepherd didn't waste time. After barking twice, it ran toward the wreck, paws splashing through mud and broken glass. It sniffed around the twisted metal, then disappeared back into the woods as quickly as it came. Walter tried to call out, but blood filled his throat. He wasn't even sure the animal was real. Hallucination? Hope? He slipped in and out of consciousness, rain mixing with blood on his forehead. Minutes passed, or was it hours? Then lights, headlights. A truck skidded to a stop on a road above. Doors slammed. Voices yelled. He's here. I see him. Flashlights danced over the wreck. EMTs and deputies jumped down into the ditch. Sheriff Briggs, stay with us. It all happened in a blur. They cut the door, braced his neck, lifted his shattered body carefully onto a stretcher. He remembered 2 things clearly, the pain in his chest and the German shepherd, now standing on the ridge above, watching. It didn't come close again. It just stood there, soaked still and somehow proud. Then it vanished into the trees. 3 days later, Walter woke up in a hospital bed, surrounded by beeping machines and 4 lines. His daughter, Claire, sat beside him holding his hand. She had flown in the moment she heard. You almost didn't make it, she whispered through tears. He tried to speak. His throat was dry. But the only thing he croaked out was, Dog. Claire leaned in. What? There was a German shepherd. She smiled faintly. Dad, they found you because one of the search volunteers had a dog. Said it kept barking toward the woods. Wouldn't stop. He blinked. That didn't sound like the same one. No, different. Sheriff Daniels visited later that day. The deputy who found him. Sir, the weird thing is there were no prints. The dog that let us bark like crazy, then took off. We thought it belonged to the hikers, but nobody claimed it. Nobody saw it again. Walter frowned. That dog, it wasn't just a dog. Daniels chuckled. Whatever it was, it saved your life. That night, Sheriff Briggs lay awake staring at the ceiling. He wasn't a superstitious man, but something about that shepherd, the way it looked at him, the timing, the silence, felt different. He'd faced down criminals, wildfires, even grizzly bears. But nothing had ever made him feel so small, so human. He didn't know it yet, but that moment in the woods was just the beginning. The German shepherd would come back. And when it did, the real story would begin. Walter Briggs stayed in the hospital for nearly 3 weeks. Surgeons repaired his shattered femur with metal rods. His ribs slowly knitted back together, and he was given enough painkillers to dull even his sharpest instincts. But the real wound was in his spirit. Something inside him had changed that night. He would lie awake, playing the moment over and over. The shepherd's eyes, its timing, the way it vanished. He never heard it bark again, never saw it in any of the security footage. No one in town reported a missing dog, either. After his discharge, Claire insisted he move in with her in a small cottage just outside town until he recovered. Walter, stubborn as ever, didn't argue. Deep down, he was afraid to go back to his own home, afraid of the silence. Weeks passed. The town moved on. Cards came in from well-wishers. Kids sent crayon-drawn pictures of him in a hospital bed next to a heroic-looking dog. Some called it Briggs' Angel. Others said it was a wild rescue dog, trained and lost. But to Walter, it was something more. Then one morning, just after dawn, while Claire was out getting groceries, Walter wheeled himself onto the porch with his crutches and sat in the crisp air. Birds chirped in the distance. Dew sparkled on the grass. The pain in his leg was less sharp today. He closed his eyes. When he opened them again, it was there, standing at the edge of the tree line, head slightly tilted, ears up, tail low, was a German shepherd. Walter didn't speak. He didn't dare move. His heart pounded against his chest like a drum. The dog stared at him for several seconds, then slowly walked forward, graceful, cautious, deliberate. Walter's lips parted. "You came back." The shepherd stopped 6 feet from the porch. It sat, then slowly lay down, resting its head on its front paws. Tears welled up in Walter's eyes. For a long time, they sat there, old lawman and mysterious dog, connected by a moment neither could explain. Claire returned later, dropping her grocery bags in shock when she saw the dog. "Dad, whose dog is that?" Walter glanced at her, his voice calm. "Mine, I think." The dog didn't bark, didn't move. It simply watched. They let it stay, gave it water, fed it some leftover chicken. That night, the dog slept on the porch, curled beside Walter's rocker. The next day, he followed Walter everywhere, down the path to the mailbox, to the shed, even sat beside him while he read the paper. Claire started calling him Shadow. But Shadow wasn't just loyal, he was intelligent, alert. He seemed to understand commands Walter hadn't even spoken aloud. One evening, Claire noticed it too. "That's not a normal stray." "Dad, I think that's a trained dog, maybe military or K9. Walter nodded. "I've worked with K9s before. This one's different. It's like he listens to my heart, not my voice." That night, Walter couldn't sleep. His bones ached, but it wasn't just physical. Something pulled at him. He rolled out of bed and stepped outside. The moonlight bathed the woods in silver. Shadow stood at attention near the porch steps, ears twitching. Then suddenly he growled, low, deep, focused. Walter froze. "What is it, boy?" The dog turned and bolted into the woods. Walter, hobbling with a cane, followed as far as he could, but Shadow had vanished. The next morning, the town buzzed with news. Someone had broken into the old Martin farm, an abandoned property known for meth activity. Sheriff Daniels had been investigating suspicious movements there for weeks. Walter knew the place well. In fact, he was the one who'd busted the original meth lab there years ago. The new gang had moved in quietly, and rumors said they were connected to a larger ring, violent men with ties to out-of-town dealers. He called Daniels. "Let me help." "You're retired, Briggs." "Let me help anyway." Daniels sighed. "You always were stubborn." "Fine, but you stick to the background." That evening, while reviewing surveillance footage from nearby properties, Walter noticed something strange. A blurry shape moving along the tree line behind the Martin farm. Four-legged, low to the ground. Not a coyote, not a fox. It was Shadow. He'd been there, watching. Walter stared at the screen. "You were warning me." The next day, Shadow returned home. Mud on his paws. A fresh scratch on his ear. He dropped something at Walter's feet. A torn glove, military style, with blood on it. Walter picked it up and stared. Shadow had found something, or someone, and that meant trouble. Big trouble. Walter stared at the torn glove in his hand. Blood-stained, frayed at the wrist, thick with forest debris. It wasn't just evidence. It was a message, one delivered by a silent, watchful guardian who had seen something deep in those woods. Shadow sat beside him, eyes locked on his face, waiting, Walter reached for his phone with a shaky hand and called Sheriff Daniels. "I've got something," he said. "Meet me at my daughter's house." Daniels arrived 30 minutes later, a little out of breath, dressed in his field jacket. Walter handed him the glove. Daniels examined it with a practiced eye. "That's military issue. Looks like something a contractor might wear. Special ops gear. Where'd you find it?" Walter nodded toward the dog. "He brought it back." Daniels looked at Shadow. "You serious?" "I think he found someone in the woods. Someone bleeding. I think he's trying to help us." Daniels raised an eyebrow. "You think a dog is leading us to a crime scene?" Walter's voice hardened. "I know he is." Daniels sighed, then gave a slight nod. "All right, gear up. We're going out there at first light." The following morning, Walter and Daniels arrived at the edge of the forest behind Claire's cottage. Daniels had brought 2 deputies, all in tactical vests, and Walter, against Claire's wishes, had strapped on his old sidearm. He still limped heavily, but adrenaline dulled the pain. Shadow stood at the edge of the trees, tail still, waiting. "All right, boy," Walter whispered. "Show us." The shepherd turned and trotted into the forest. They followed in silence. The morning air was cold, crisp, filled with the scent of pine and dew. Shadow led them through winding paths, over fallen logs, down into a gully thick with brush. Then he stopped. Walter caught up and looked around. The area was quiet, too quiet. Shadow sniffed the air, then darted to a mound of leaves and began pawing. Deputy Carter pulled out a long stick and brushed away the top layer. That's when they saw it. Boot prints. Fresh. And blood. Faint smears on a rock, as if someone had sat down here, injured. Daniels knelt and inspected it. Someone was here, all right, and not long ago. Shadow began barking suddenly. Not frantic, focused, directed. He ran about 10 feet ahead and barked again. Daniels stood. "Let's move." They followed Shadow deeper into the woods until they reached an old hunting cabin, half-collapsed, forgotten, with boards missing from the side. Shadow crouched low behind a bush, ears forward. Still. Walter motioned to Daniels. "He's telling us something's inside." Daniels gestured to his men. They moved into position, surrounding the building. Then came the sound. A click. Metal. From inside the cabin. Daniels froze. He whispered into his radio. "Gun." Walter moved to the side, flattening his back against a tree. Suddenly, the door of the cabin burst open, and a man in dark tactical gear stumbled out, rifle in hand, blood soaking his shirt. Shadow growled, lunged forward, then stopped, waiting for the man to react. The man raised his weapon. Daniel shouted, "Drop it! Now!" The man hesitated, swaying. His face was pale, sweat dripping down his brow. Then he fell to his knees. "Medic!" Daniels called. The deputies swarmed in, disarmed the man, and secured the area. At the station, Walter learned the truth. The man's name was Riley Krantz, a former private military contractor turned mercenary. He had been hired as security for a drug ring expanding into the county. His team had used a Martin farm as a staging ground. Then something had gone wrong. A deal had turned into a shootout. Riley was wounded and left behind. He had been hiding in the woods for 2 nights, bleeding and delirious. Shadow had found him. Walter stared through a glass at the holding room, where Riley sat with Medic. Daniels came up beside him. "You still think that dog was just lucky?" Walter smiled faintly. "No, he's more than that." Daniels chuckled. "What are you going to do with him?" Walter turned to the window, watching Shadow lie calmly on the floor beside the desk. "Keep him close. Seems like he still has work to do." That night, Walter sat on the porch, sipping warm tea. The stars were brilliant, scattered across the dark sky. Shadow lay at his feet, head resting on his paws. Claire stepped outside, wrapping herself in a blanket. "I heard what happened," she said. "That dog might have saved lives." Walter nodded. "He's the reason I survived that crash. And now this. He's not just a dog. He's a guardian." Claire looked at Shadow. "Where do you think he came from?" Walter shook his head. "I don't know, but I think he came to finish something. and I think he'll leave when he's ready." As if on cue, Shadow lifted his head and looked up at Walter, his eyes calm, steady, watchful. And in that quiet moment, under the stars, Walter finally understood. He hadn't been saved by chance. He'd been chosen. The next morning brought rain, not the soft kind that whispered through trees, but the relentless kind that drenched everything and turned the roads to mud. Walter stood inside the sheriff's office with Shadow at his side, staring at the evidence board now filled with photos, maps, and notes. Riley Krantz had finally started talking. According to him, there was more, a network, a larger operation hidden under the guise of a small-town crime ring. The crash that nearly killed Walter hadn't been an accident. It was intentional. Riley had overheard a conversation. Someone wanted Walter out of the way. Someone inside the department. Daniels didn't want to believe it, but the pieces were falling into place. Why had backup been delayed that night? Why did the cleanup happen so fast after crash? Walter felt the weight of betrayal sink deep in his chest. And the only reason he was still alive was Shadow. Claire arrived mid-morning with coffee and sandwiches. She handed one to her father, who hadn't eaten in hours. "I don't trust anyone right now," Walter murmured, taking a sip. Claire sat beside him. "Except the dog?" Walter smiled. "Especially the dog." Shadow suddenly perked up, ears high, head turning toward the hallway. Moments later, a young deputy entered the room, Officer Brent, new to force, friendly, always quiet. But Shadow growled, low, deep, instinctive. Everyone turned. Brent froze in the doorway. "What's wrong with the dog?" Daniels narrowed his eyes. Shadow's never wrong. Walter stood up slowly, watching the shepherd. "You smell something, boy." Shadow moved forward, tense, steps deliberate. Brent backed up slightly. "I didn't do anything." But the fear in his voice betrayed him. Daniels motioned to two deputies. "Check his locker." Brent's voice cracked. "Wait, Shadow barked, lunged, but Walter held him back just in time. Within 10 minutes, the search revealed what Shadow already knew. Inside Brent's locker, burner phones cached in a USB stick, containing messages and maps linked directly to the same cartel Krantz had named. It was Brent, all along. He had delayed backup the night of Walter's crash. He'd sabotaged calls, leaked patrol schedules, and tipped off the dealers. The crash wasn't an accident. It was a setup, and Walter had been the target. Brent was arrested on the spot. His expression had changed from confusion to cold calculation. He said nothing. But Shadow didn't stop staring at him, eyes locked, as if memorizing the face of a traitor. Daniels turned to Walter, shaken. If that dog hadn't reacted, we'd still be in the dark. Walter looked down at Shadow. "He sees the truth before we do. Claire hugged her father that night. He's saved you twice now." Walter nodded and uncovered something much darker. Claire looked at the dog. "Do you think he's meant for you?" Walter didn't answer immediately. Instead, he knelt beside Shadow. "You came here for a reason, didn't you?" The shepherd blinked slowly, tail flicking once. And Walter understood. Shadow had come for justice. 3 weeks later, Walter sat across from Riley Krantz in an interrogation room. The mercenary was thinner, face hollow, but his eyes had lost none of their sharpness. "You know that dog?" Walter asked. Krantz didn't flinch. "Yeah." "Where's he from?" Krantz leaned back in his chair. "You don't want the truth." "Try me." Krantz sighed. "That German shepherd was part of a military unit, K-9 Special Operations. They called him Ghost. Smartest dog I ever saw. But after one mission went bad, he disappeared. We thought he was dead. That was 2 years ago." Walter's heart pounded. "You're telling me he was trained?" "Trained to do things most humans can't," Krantz said. "Track across miles, detect lies, sense danger. But after that last op, he vanished." Walter sat in silence. "You're saying he found me." "I'm saying," Krantz said slowly, "maybe he chose you." Back at home, Walter sifted through old news reports and military logs. He found mention of a unit disbanded after a covert mission in South America. No survivors listed. No dogs reported missing, but a photo surfaced, grainy, black and white. A team in gear, a German shepherd among them, eyes sharp, chest marked with a faint white patch, exactly like Shadow's. One evening, Walter took Shadow for a walk through the woods behind the cabin. They stopped at the creek, and Walter tossed a stick. Shadow chased, returned, sat beside him without a sound. "You've done everything," Walter whispered. "You've given us the truth. You saved my life." Shadow nuzzled his hand. Walter stared into the forest. "You leaving soon?" The dog looked away into the trees. He already knew. The next morning, Walter woke to find Shadow gone. The porch was empty, the bed untouched. A trail of paw prints led into the woods. But they stopped suddenly, as if the wind had erased them. Claire searched with him for hours, but Shadow had vanished. Like a shadow, like a ghost. A week passed. Then, too, every morning Walter would wake, step onto the porch, and listen, hoping. But the forest stayed quiet. Then one day a package arrived. No name, no return address. Inside, a single photograph. It showed Shadow, standing on a cliffside under moonlight, overlooking a valley far below. Around his neck, a tag that read only, "Justice isn't over." Walter held the photo tight, tears welling in his eyes. He whispered to wind, "Wherever you are, keep going, because some heroes don't wear badges. Some don't speak. Some just appear when they're needed most and vanish when their purpose is done." Shadow was never just a dog. He was a symbol, a guardian, and though he was gone, his legacy would never leave.